going to start off with a paper version, do what we need to do. All right, we're live here, House Education on March 16th. First order of business today is to talk about PCB funding and mitigation. We have draft language here, which will, I think, ultimately be converted into calling it a school construction bill, because really the first half of it reflects the school construction bill that's coming out of the Senate. And this is adding on to it, because it seems very germane, the PCB language that we've already discussed. I guess maybe just another quick reminding walkthrough and whatever you're looking for from us, I have a sense as well.
So in front of you, this is Michael Grady with Legislative Council. In front of you, you should have draft 1.3 with a 3/15/2023 date and a 158 timestamp. Generally, what this bill does is it takes S-124, the Senate School Construction Aid Task Force bill that Becky Wasserman drafted, and it puts it into a committee bill with you, and then links to that a second section related to PCB testing. And that section will pause the PCB testing until the report from the School Construction Task Force comes back. And then at that point, there will be a determination by you, General Assembly, what to do with the money for PCB testing. The PCB testing section also has some contingencies because there's been testing that's going on. And when there are results that require mitigation or remediation, the agency still needs to go forward with that. And you need to make some decisions about what level mitigation or remediation would be funded by the state or cost shared by the municipality/school district, where those funds come from, and also where the unused funds revert to for future use. So that's generally what the bill does. I can step through more specifically if you would like.
Would people like a more detailed explanation before we kind of talk about some of the policy decisions that we have in here? Can you give us just a reminder of the financial right now, what money exists, where it exists, and who's in charge of doling it out?
Sure. So for the PCB testing, you can basically just go to page 5. There was $32 million that was coming from the education fund from a reserve set aside. From talking with JFO yesterday, there's $29 million of that left. The other funding, up to $40 million, that was appropriated separately to A&R for.
So what number did you say?
Pardon me?
What was the number you said?
It started out as 6.4, and then there was an additional 1.2, I believe, that was added in. And so that got, with the 32, that got the total amount close to 40. And they have been spending money, and they've spent that money. There have been some money at the emergency board. That's the 3.2 approximately of the 32 million that's already been spent. And so there's $29 million left. That's basically the end result. That money came out of the education reserve fund. And so that's what is left. Some of that's likely going to be needed to do the mitigation and remediation that's required because of the testing that's already been conducted. And then there's testing ongoing now. I wouldn't say it's likely, it's possible that testing will require some remediation and mitigation as well. So you have to build in that contingency for the use of some of those funds. And that's what the language on page 5 of the draft does. The first subsection pauses the testing. It says, notwithstanding all the acts that appropriated money and authorize the testing of indoor air quality of schools. A&R shall not initiate testing for PCBs at any school in the state after the effective date of the act. And the effective date would be on passage. Until the report of the school construction aid task force required under section 1 has been submitted to the General Assembly and the General Assembly approves further testing. So that's important. So you build into the school construction task force. They have a year basically to get back to you with the recommendation. And then you have to, as a General Assembly, approve further testing. And you might say, oh, why don't we just go with the task force recommendation and not rely on the General Assembly approving testing? Well, it's an appropriation. You have to take an act effectively under the Constitution to appropriate that money.
Okay, so just to be clear, 29 million is sort of in that big reserve, but there is still 2.5.
At the E-board.
Okay.
Right.
All right. And is that sort of serving any purpose at the moment?
I honestly don't know. I think that those questions of like how much is needed right now is you probably need A&R to come in here and tell you their exact accounting.
Yeah. So what's the use of the 2.5 that the E-board currently has, and what's the process for accessing it?
Well, it's the E-board process. It's the process that the E-board goes through to award any money that's under their authority.
Is there any, I don't want to make you answer a policy question, but is there any reason that if we were to say, okay, we're going to go forward with this, we're going to fund 100% of remediation, that would seem to cover the E-board money's sort of definition of use. So I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a more logical thing to do to sweep that money into the 2.9 million and make just a fund.
I think that's your prerogative. I think that discussion's likely going to be had at here and at the Appropriations Committee about gathering everything that's available. But yes, I think that's definitely up to you. And this language doesn't change that. It just says A&R stop testing, right? And then in this second subsection, it says if they've initiated testing prior to the effective date and it indicates the need for mitigation or remediation, A&R shall pay a percentage of the mitigation or remediation, and from what fund? You're pausing. Where does it come from? Is that the money that you leave at the E-board and you use that? And then any of funds that are appropriated. Well, actually, let me look. Page 6, lines 6 through 9, at the end of fiscal year 23, all remaining funds revert to the education fund.
Right.
And so that would be, and it would be there for reserve, to be held in reserve for future school construction needs as recommended by the School Construction Aid Task Force. And you will have to take an act of the General Assembly to move that money out of the education fund in its reserve.
Yes, all right, got some hands here, Representative Williams and Representative Austin.
The reserves, do you have any idea what we're talking about? Do you know how much money is going to be spent to what we have going on?
If you're gonna make the PCB testing part of the larger set of school construction, I couldn't even begin to estimate what the total cost of school
So it
construction.
could be above and beyond what we already have. There may not be any reserves, possibly.
Well, it stays in reserve until you expend it, till you appropriate it.
Okay.
I do expect that the recommended cost the school construction task force report, it's going to far exceed $30 million. It's probably going to be hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right, so just to be clear, you're talking about school construction,
I'm
not,
talking about,
and you're talking about PCB remediation.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, I think that really depends on the testing.
yeah.
And so you've only had a couple, the testing has only indicated a few schools so far, two, I believe, that needed remediation. And remediation's the expensive part. Mitigation, you can limit access, you can do some things to prevent the exposure. That's not as expensive. But if going forward, they find additional schools that need full-scale remediation, that will be more expensive.
I'm going to just do a little vocabulary grounding here. We've sort of adopted remediation as an umbrella term for abatement and mitigation, with abatement being sort of the removal of and all that.
That abatement is removal, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, Terry, to sort of sum up, we've got, if we were to sort of sweep in this 2.5 million, we have about $32.5 million that is earmarked for PCB remediation. You know, we don't, if tomorrow current testing shows that another school has to be bulldozed, then yeah, we don't have enough money. But if we sort of pause testing and the testing is underway that we will finish out, shows $100,000 worth of remediation, then we've got, you know, $30 million. Representative Austin.
Yeah, you answered the one question, is finding remediation and moving and housing students. Who pays for that? That's one question. And then yesterday we heard Burlington should get what they need in terms of funding. What percent of that 29 million will Burlington get?
So, you know, if we choose to add the Burlington abatement, that would be, we're going to get testimony on that, and that's somewhere between 17 and $20 million.
And the moving and housing?
That's not a calculation. That's all just part of the cost.
Is that under remediation? Would it be borne on the school or would it be the state?
I don't know the answer to that.
I think you would have to define
Yeah.
whether or not that is going to be part of your abatement.
Representative Duke.
We had, and I'll just answer that with the experience of one of my schools had it. They had one room that was too high. They already have a plan on moving the kids out of that classroom, and they did that internally in their own, within their own.
Yeah, if they can.
Yeah, if they can, because they were able to stay in the same building,
Yeah.
one room. My question is, so this bill, it goes into effect on passage, and then we'd have to vote on it once we get the report. You said the report was coming in a year?
Yep, it's, sorry, on January 15, 2024.
2024. So less than a year. So we would be able to act, because my concern was if it took a year to today, then we'd have to have another till next session. Yeah, and because my concern is holding this off too long, because it was a big problem 2 years ago when we added it in. And, you know, the longer we wait, the more, you know, we've already educated people and they're ready for this. That's kind of what my holdup was. But if it's just next year, that could probably be better, because we can act within that, because we do act pretty slow as a legislature, but, okay, that was just my question. Thanks.
Representative Taylor.
This is going to be a question and it's going to probably ask you to speculate. So I understand if you can't answer this question, but would us pausing the PCBs open us up to possible litigation? We know that there's some lawsuits happening towards Monsanto right now, but us pausing with that.
So the lawsuit against Bayer/Monsanto is really unrelated to what I would say ongoing testing. You might have a statewide cause of action against them going forward if there's a sizable amount of contamination found. But I think your question is more if there would be litigation against a student or a teacher or user of the school.
Correct, if there are health concerns later on. Having
And whether or not that there would be a cause of action against the state for pausing never say never, but I think that there is no federal mandate to do testing. The state mandate is really at the discretion of the General Assembly. Most testing and most programs like this are contingent upon the appropriations that are available. If you had gone forward with full-scale testing, you probably would have run out of money, and some schools might not have been tested right away anyway. So although somebody could probably say that the state or the school had a duty to test, I think basically what you're doing is you're just putting a pause effectively till future testing comes in based on the availability. I don't know if that rises to a level of liability. It will depend on facts though, facts of a case, facts of a school, facts of exposure, who knew what, et
a lot
cetera.
of moving parts.
Right.
Thank you.
And I guess, is it important to note that a school district can test anyway?
Yes, yeah. They can test on their own.
PCB testing here.
Yeah. This is about the state funding it, the state program to test. School districts can test all they want.
Questions?
Well, just sets up, to me, an equity issue, because there are schools now that have had the state pay for testing and remediation. And then there are other schools that would have to pay for it. So it's just a concern. I don't think there's an answer there, but it's a concern for me.
So,
But I just want to clarify that you're using the word pause.
Yep.
And that's important, right, to center this conversation. I'm just,
I don't know, you can turn this into
but in this conversation, you've been using the word pause.
I have been using
Okay.
the word pause.
Okay, yeah. I actually used that term with the financial software that we kept trying to implement.
That didn't end well.
Representative Williams.
Thank you. Excuse me, this is more of just a statement.
Statement away.
I have a tendency to need to apologize to particular people for particular reasons. And today I'm apologizing to my constituents because I worked so hard on the school choice and independent schools that I set this aside. I had 12 hours to make amends and have conversations with them. And as a result of that, I am hearing a lot of inequity when we pause. I also respect Representative Too's concern about pause and how long a pause can be. I know that we have worked very hard in the last few years to push this through, and to pause is not making my constituents feel that like they have an equal opportunity to know where they stand. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Representative Buss.
I'd like to say that we don't know where they stand if we don't pause either. There's no guarantee that there's enough money to take care of everybody as it is. What the pause is allowing us to do is to create a better plan for everybody moving forward. It's not saying we're not going to fund everybody moving forward. It's saying we have to really take a hard look at what the overall needs are. Right now, the lack of plan puts everybody in a position of extreme financial unviability.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I can use the whole finance software situation as an example where it wasn't working well and it was frustrating many people. And they wanted to pause that, and my response to that was, if you pause, then you never get clear data to know whether this is going to work or not. So you have to keep plugging forward and get all that information. And have the opportunity for people to feel like they know where they're at.
But we are plugging forward to get that information. We're pausing the PCBs, looking at what the overall construction need is so that we can plug those two
Right.
things together.
I understand that, but I also, the word pause scares the bejesus out of me because I know what that can.
I think our choices are keep going the way it is, pause or eliminate.
Or what?
It's just
What's the third?
make the program go away, period, 100%. I guess I might take issue with the characterization that we worked hard on this program. This was actually slipped into the budget in the special session of 21 when we were with zero. I mean, we heard, the head of the VSA yesterday sort of recount the history of this program. It really came into being without a single minute of testimony in this committee.
Well, I guess what I remember mostly is sitting here with the state folks and saying, we don't see a clear plan about the money part, and they're saying, we'll take care of that. I heard them say, we'll take care of that. And then it didn't happen. What's that?
Yeah, that's right, because only we can take care of the money part.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And so I think it is, and I think, as we heard from the AOE the other day, that as we try to take a broader look at our construction needs across the state, this is, as she said, like a grenade that keeps getting, blowing up in your way as you move forward. And I think that's why we want to fold this into the greater conversation.
Well, as you know, I was leaning that way until I had conversations, and I think about how my little school, which doesn't really exist in reality, but my little school is probably full of it.
Yeah.
And it's damaging us every day, but we don't know that. So everybody else is getting fixed, and we're sitting here hoping and praying because that's the only thing we have at this point, that it's not going to kill us before that pause becomes something that's in reality and fixes us. And that's where the inequity gets thrown in there.
Yeah. Yes, Representative Minier.
To Representative Williams' point, I think there's a lot of fear, but we had to the level was set somewhere, right? What's acceptable and what isn't. And I believe it's the case that the level that was chosen represents a correlation, not a causation, of 6 cases per million people. And that only happens if you are in the school for 30 years, if you are there for 8.5 or 9 hours per day, and if you're there for 200 and some odd days per year. So I think there's a lot of fear about what's going to happen to children. That is not a level that children are going to be exposed to.
Well, so should we change those levels to make them?
Well, this is the trick. I mean, I'm
More
looking at it as a reasonable layman, but I'm a layman. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a health professional. But I think a lot of the fear is about that. And if you look at the levels at which this is going to happen,
Right.
none of these kids is going to be
Is
exposed to
that something
zero.
we can look at then?
Well, I think one of the issues, one of the reasons to sort of say we need to step back and get a better grounding on this is because the state has changed its levels somewhat in a way that I'm not sure everybody would agree with. They're different from the EPA. And I think as we've heard testimony say, this isn't settled science yet. But I think that the greater issue here is how do we move forward with a state construction vision when this keeps getting in the way? Because when you test and you get a reading at the level that the state has currently set, that requires immediate action. So you could be throwing good money after bad. As we heard testimony from one of the places down in Windham County, we're we're very fearful we're going to be tested. They're going to find an issue. We're going to have to put millions of dollars into a building that we hope to bulldoze in 5 years. And I think that that's sort of the vision here that's challenging and what we're trying to address by folding it into a task force that is going to take a broader look at the whole thing and make recommendations to the legislature January next year.
Well, and to me, the greater equity issue, I would rather have my kid in a school that has not yet been tested than go remote again, even
Oh,
though.
I agree with that too. I mean, I won't argue that one.
And you've said before, you don't have a Macy's to move into. I mean, that to me.
Well, we don't need one.
You don't want one
We just need
either,
someone's
yeah.
basement.
But that to me is the greater inequity, and we've seen what the last 3 years have brought.
Yeah, I know.
We're certainly balancing risk here, the risk of closing the school as a result of this versus the risk of, all of the risks that we face every day. Representative Taylor.
So, yeah, so I definitely agree. There's, like, that was in testimony yesterday, there are definitely details we need to figure out. And I think that really should be our focus, is figuring out those details. But I'm concerned with pausing because we're going to need these numbers regardless when we start talking about construction. They're numbers that are going to need to be factored into this. And so pausing that now, I'm afraid that we're going to actually delay construction when it's time to start talking about construction. Because if we set up a task force, we wait for them, we're years out, and then we're going to have to pick up testing. We're going to have to wait for the testing to happen again. So my thought process is we go through with the testing, but we work on the details to try to figure out the mitigation part and the levels. The levels have to be addressed. So.
Yeah, I guess I concern, I think when we start saying what the science should be, I guess that makes me concerned. But the other issue is, if we continue testing, we have zero idea what the financial impact of that is. It could be $30 million, it could be $300 million. 2 Burlington school districts, we sort of bankrupted our ability to do any construction in the future.
Well, that would be the case even when the task force is done with their studies.
What's that?
Even that would be the case even when the task force was done with their obligation.
I guess we'd have to wait and see what their recommendation is. Their recommendation may be to say that PCB testing occur, at the time of a school construction project. And if we're doing, 5 school projects a year, then it's incorporated within a bigger plan.
Yeah, and I'm in no way saying that this board should be deciding the scientific factors of this whole thing. But I think that the state and the EPA should be working on a system. We would not obviously do that.
Yeah.
And so basically, to your point, that's what this task force would be doing, right? Is answering these questions so that we move forward with intention and don't bankrupt the system that we have. But if we're just trying to figure it out as we go along, then we're kind of acting haphazardly and dangerously in a lot of ways. So isn't that what, this task force would be doing? What you're proposing is that we're acting thoughtfully and intentionally and using evidence-based data to direct our moves. Right?
Which we should have done from day one.
Right, but that's what we're doing in this room now, is re-correcting the course and making sure that we're moving through with intention and care and evidence-based, and using an evidence-based approach.
Representative Buss?
Is there anything that we've ever asked the scientists? Because, in a perfect world, we would be able to test and could do this task force at the same time so that both sets of data were being collected together. The issue is that one set requires immediate action and the other set is planned action. So and so that I get stuck in the middle seeing unclear scientific data. So that makes me want to say, well, at least let's pause the bomb and focus on the plan. And then when the bomb comes along, we just keep feeding in the grenades into this clear set system, if you will. Because that way, at least when we know that, okay, this school got tested for PCBs and it's in the roof and it's in the gym, well, we were already planning on renovating that gym because that roof is already at a certain age that needs to be replaced anyway. So that's the reason why I feel that the two sitting next to each other, if that's our only option, then it seems like going with a calculation that we feed unclear data into is better than having to react. I don't feel that it's good governance to put us in a state of reaction.
Who creates the task force and the time frame for that?
It's all right here in the bill.
Oh, I should read it.
You just got it.
Yeah, I just got it. And I'm not a fast reader.
Mainly the governor.
But I think you're talking about a lot of the policy decisions that you're going to have to make
I realize you're saying
going
you're
forward.
not wanting to make policies.
As the person that drafted the lead and drinking water fixture bill, the decisions that had to be made, it was about what level you wanted to have, what you were going to test, what was going to be removed, the action, and you made all of those policy decisions yourself.
We did, and we did that over 10 weeks of testimony with a significant amount of time devoted to it. This PCB testing program essentially was created without a clear path forward, without any testimony on the House side, and I guess without I'd never heard of a coalition that was demanding it. And so, it seems to me that it is in there, it's moving forward, and none of those questions have been answered. And at the same time, we are trying to have a much more strategic look at our school construction in general. And two, I feel, can't go on in their own silos. They need to come together and be discussed together. Did you have a?
I just wanted to understand what Rep. Taylor was asking or saying. So is it basically to continue testing but not taking action on those results?
To figuring out the action part and figuring out the details, right? We do know that the system, how it's operating right now, is not functioning at its best. And those are the details, and we spoke about it yesterday in testimony, that we need to work on, and we need to come up with a solution on those. In my opinion, we still need the numbers, we still need the testing, and I think it should move forward.
But I think ultimately that's true, but then I guess the statement and a question, the statement is, I think that will ultimately sow fear for people like Rep. Williams's constituents. You get a number and that number has been set as unacceptable, but now we're not going to take action on it.
And the counter argument is we're going to sow fear in people by
not.
Forward.
And then I guess the question is, how much do we slow movement down on construction by pausing this? Does that actually meaningfully slow down what we would do? And that's a question to anybody.
Yeah, well, and that's probably more of a rhetorical question than anything else.
Yeah.
Representative Brownell.
Well, looking at this task force, I would assume that they're looking at the schools to see what is needed. In that process, would they not be looking to see if PCBs were there at the same time? Because otherwise they're going to say a roof needed in this school and this school it doesn't, and that's the one with the PCBs. You would think that this task force has to look at the whole thing when they're looking to see about construction needs.
So the task force is a temporary task force, lasts for 6 months, and its job, we are adding to it by having them work into their deliberations how we address the PCB issue in the future. And then their main task is to develop a commission that would be sort of modeled on that Rhode Island idea that we had, that would really take on the work of school construction in general, and perhaps PCBs as well. But there would be an independent commission, such as they have in other states, whose job it is to, study, fund, assist, whatever, with school construction in general. That was the original vision in the Senate bill of the task force. We are saying, and also please take into account the PCB testing program. But while you're taking it into account between now and January, we're going to pause the testing. And I think that the concern is, and the decision we have to make is, so during that time and whatever recommendation we get later, the testing will be paused. Is that a thoughtful decision to make, or is that a rash decision to make? I think what I'm hearing from folks here, and this is sort of my view, is that right now what's going on is a little bit not well planned because it has the potential to cost an amount of money that we have zero idea what it is, that we could be investing millions in buildings that will ultimately need a lot more, and we're fixing things before they, but then making it harder to fix them later. But again, the idea is that the task force look at this, and but in the meantime, so we are balancing, as we always do here, various issues. Representing Williams.
Is it acceptable to have the task force be the ones to determine the levels for testing?
I would say, I think that the task force's job is great enough as it is, and that they should have the ability to say, we believe that the 2024 legislature should revisit this, set levels, and,
Just between the state action level and the EPA action level, that seems to be a huge discrepancy. And I'm just hoping someone is looking at those two, because if we went with the EPA levels, we probably would be okay, possibly. But it just seemed like that also happened with lead.
so that may be something the task force says the legislature needs to address.
Okay.
So we have got several policy decisions to make right now in order to give Ledge Council some marching orders to come back. So one is, do we want Ledge Council to come back with a new version, or do we are we uncomfortable moving forward with this? It seems to me we've had a lot of testimony that has said, we need to get a better handle on this and what it really means, and what are the right numbers, how much is it going to cost, how are we going to address this? So I guess, is there anybody who is against moving forward with this, and are there sort of suggestions that might make you more comfortable with it?
I just don't want to wait a year to look at those action levels. I don't understand why we can't put something in here that in this year or so, that they're looking at the action levels, so we have that information right away when the legislature starts next session.
We have a whole rest of our term here until May. We can take that on ourselves as well, if we want. All right, so let's go to decision number 2, and then we're coming down to money. So we've got, I guess I would recommend that whatever we do, we sweep in the e-board $2.5 million into the full amount. And I guess now we're going to have a little auction. Okay, funding for remediation. Do I hear support for anything other than 100%?
What does 100% of remediation mean? Would that mean paying for all of Burlington's school?
No, I think that, anyway, so so let's just set Burlington aside. Yeah. And I think that otherwise, it will be up to whichever entity is sort of reimbursing. I guess, can you have a comment on that?
I think it's up to you how you define what you're going to fund.
Yeah.
If you hit an EPA action level and you have to remove everything and limit access, it's obviously going to be more expensive. And then are you going to pay for relocation? That's a policy call.
Right. As it stands right now, it basically would pay, if we said 100% funding, and then the language basically says,
It's basically drafted as a cost share with a no number for the cost share.
yeah, but it defines sort of what.
Right, mitigation or remediation, but those terms are not defined.
And one other sort of policy question that's going here is who does the reimbursement? With lead, the AOE handled it. This currently has A&R handling it, right?
Correct.
But that is their understanding that we actually never set up a reimbursement funding system. It never was approved or anything. There's just money sitting there. I think I would personally, just because the AOE handled the lead reimbursement, they're probably better versed in it. We may need to get a little testimony before we move this bill forward from them. Amount of time.
So that's actually a decision itself. Is it reimbursement or is it prospective funding after testing indicates a certain level?
Yes. So what you're saying is currently it says.
So use the lead as a drinking water bill as an example.
Yeah,
Went out and tested, and if the test has exceeded the standard, which was a standard that you set as a General Assembly, then the school had to replace. And then they had to submit their request for reimbursement after they had incurred all the costs. There was a discussion of whether or not you just gave the school the money prior to them doing the replacement and remediation. That I think is a policy decision as well, because you're potentially dealing with numbers.
Big numbers.
Yes.
What would the language be then if we went sort of a just give them the money route? With an accounting, I assume, afterward to make sure you didn't overpay.
Oh, yeah, it would basically be set up, in my opinion, as a grant. And you'd have to follow the terms and conditions for state grants.
Okay.
Where there's accountability and accounting for that.
I'm seeing nods that that's probably the route to go.
I mean, I think that's the model that Rhode Island used for their construction in general. And if we don't do it that way, then we get right back to Representative Williams' question about equity. Poor communities are not going to be able to do this up front.
Fair enough. I think that's correct. And budgets are set.
Yeah.
There's no ability to get the money.
Yeah. I think that if nobody objects, I think that we would make that the AOE taking that on. That we would do it 100%. The e-board money goes into that fund.
Yep.
Am I lacking any policy decision here? Representative Taylor? Yeah.
So just a clarifying question. There's been no mitigation as of yet, so correct in the state? I mean, I know we have locations that have been designated to need mitigation, but no money's been spent.
I think that's actually not correct. I think like Charlotte, for example, installed some fan filters, for a few $1,000s.
I'm just concerned because right now it's 80/20, right? So some people have spent. So I'm just wondering about.
I think that's an excellent question. That may have been 100% through the e-board financing, but can we work in some language that says if they only got 80/20,
Sure.
that the state will bring that up to 100%? Thank you very much for that point. Very important.
Can I talk to A&R and drafting this? Okay,
Whatever, talk to whoever you need to talk.
okay, great.
Let's talk about the big one, and that's Burlington. We will have testimony tomorrow at 9 in the morning, so I want everybody here at 9 from Burlington with a breakdown of the sort of cost of, let's call it abatement, which is bulldozing and removing their building. It's probably going to be in the neighborhood of $17 to $20 million. We've got 32 here. With a pause in testing, we're not going to incur, as far as we know, any, hopefully, but this is the question, of course, through the whole system, another big ticket fix. Of course, depending on what the testing that is in process shows, that so far, everything's been okay from a huge cost point of view. Burlington has tested all of their schools at this point. No other schools showed a problem. We've had, what I would call perhaps smaller problems with Cabot and some others my gut tells me, I'm going to tell you, I'm not, the remaining dollars would cover. I think we've heard I think that there's a strong argument to be made that this $190 million rebuild of Burlington isn't 100% of their own making. That it is, due to, at that point, what were exceptionally low levels that the state had set. It basically said, everybody's out of there. So I guess I'm putting in advocacy that we include the $17 to $20 million for Burlington as part of that abatement funding. And we'll get a breakdown of the numbers tomorrow. This money is already set aside. It's not new, a new appropriation. It's in the reserve of the education fund. Representative Williams.
I'm just looking for clarification.
Yeah.
Did we create the PCB bill because of Burlington? Or did Burlington have the problem because we created the bill?
No, Burlington had the problem because because they were going to do a major renovation. And prior to doing a major renovation, you need to test. So they tested. At that point, the state level was very low. The state has since brought it back up to a new level. I think we're talking 0.3 to 15, and the EPA level is like 100. I don't know what those numbers are. And that's what caused them to move out. That also spurred on the Senate side some senators to put forth the PCB testing program such as it is.
So the bill didn't really cause that. The renovation decision caused that.
The state, I would argue that the state's set level for PCBs caused it.
Whole level things.
Yeah.
A mess.
So I guess if it's okay with the committee, I'm going to ask Ledge Council to go ahead and carefully craft language that is specific to demolition and removal of any prior, something that is essentially describes the Burlington situation, but doesn't necessarily say that, that describes the Burlington situation.
Okay.
And with a placeholder number of $17 million.
Okay.
So we did give Burlington funds for housing at Macy's.
For renovating Macy's, yes.
And for housing them. I mean, I guess.
We gave them $3-point-something million to renovate Macy's.
Is renovation is that same, I'm just clarifying, you're saying that same ability of other towns that are now testing, we would do that for them?
So that was a policy question that we needed to answer. So what you're saying is, like, if students need to be relocated, is that part of something that we should be reimbursing? Am I hearing am I seeing nods?
Well, I'm all for equity.
Yeah.
I am. I don't know how that's.
Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah. I thought Superintendent or Jeff Francis yesterday kept saying that this is a state imposed mandate on schools.
We call it a legislature imposed.
Yeah, legislature, the same thing. So that kind of frames it for me into the future place.
What is your time frame?
We would like to, we have a general timeframe of midnight tomorrow. What is your capacity?
I was just thinking if the school construction task force report's coming over from the Senate,
Yes.
is that your vehicle, or are you going to put a committee bill for? That's basically.
Yes, yeah, we would like to have this be a committee bill that we
Okay.
know about.
Okay, got it. Sure.
So what if in a case, the school has to be closed, and if we're going to pay for rehousing the students, there isn't an acceptable Macy's nearby? Are we then paying for them to go remote for a while? Are we paying for their new school? Did they make that choice?
There's a task force question.
Well, you know,
Have time to
but,
figure out the answers.
I mean, I'm
Yeah, so you're-
worried about what remediation means.
right. I guess, anybody want to throw in on that?
I just want to know how many schools need to be tested before the pause?
I guess we don't know how many are in process.
We don't know how many.
Well, we could probably find out.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess if it were 2 or 6 or 12, how would that change your
If
opinion?
it's 2, we have to relocate them and stuff, it's going to be less money than if it's 6.
So let's say it's 6, then what?
I don't know.
Do we not pay
Oh.
relocation?
No. I mean, it's a question of when you say relocation, like there's not a Macy's, what are we talking about? A hotel or?
This is, I'd say one of the issues that we have with the PCB testing program is we don't know what that is.
Answers. That's why I said we're doing this in a haphazard way. That's why the task force is needed, so that we can answer these questions.
I don't know if we're talking about building a new school or.
And is
I don't know what
there,
we're talking about.
can we also in this bill, ask for the levels to be reassessed? I don't understand why the levels in Vermont are stricter than our national levels. That's confusing to me.
So could we add some language to the task force duties to review PCB, provide a recommendation to the General Assembly in their report as well as to how to address?
The discrepancy.
Yes, because I feel like if we could address levels, then we could look at, well, these levels are questionably high, so we can do this particular construction in a more detailed and manner because it isn't such a immediate public health risk. I think that having tiers would be really important.
I have a meeting at 10. The vice chair will continue the conversation. He has a hard stop at 10:15, but it sounds like we are really closing in on final marching orders here.
Yep.
Need me for anything else?
So patient.
Could you fix this, please?
So I'm gonna go out and put the bat signal up to A&R.
Okay, I think you have some work.
So,
And if you are.
Thank you.
all right. Have a good one.
All right, folks, we are. We're on break.
Our agenda.
We're on break until 10:30.
So are we done discussing this?
So we would
You think
need the
you're right?
next draft from Ledge Council, and then our hope is to review it again tomorrow and possibly vote it out.
Is it a vote or is it a?
This one would be a vote, to vote the bill out. Yeah.
We have guests here and maybe are they here to introduce themselves or you guys? And just do that before our break so they don't have to sit here for another.
Yes, sure.
Oh, okay.
Would that be okay?
Well, it's not on the schedule and we
Right.
have to be careful with minors, so I don't wanna.
I'm 18.
Okay, okay. They're just different roles in terms of how we, sure, what brings you here today?
I was invited to come and sit in, I guess. My name's Abigail Hunter. I am Miss Vermont's Outstanding Teen with the Miss America organization. And yeah.
Welcome.
Great.
Thank you.
Welcome. Are you here all day?
Yes.
What is your platform?
Mine is called Pursue the Arts, Building Acceptance, Respect, Tolerance, and Safety within arts programs and music, art, and dance.
Are you for it?
And you brought people with you?
Yes, this is my mom and this is my grandma.
Thank you so much for coming.